Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar presented to you by the SAP Customer Experience Group. This is the 11th webinar in the current series about upgrading to SAP BusinessObjects BI Platform 4.1. My name is Adrian Paul from the SAP Customer Experience Group, and today's webinar is about BI 4.1 troubleshooting. This webinar will be presented to you by my SAP colleague, Graham Sturmey. The list of all the webinars in this series has been published in SCN, and you may have already seen this SCN page, which contains the full webinar schedule. This webinar is being recorded, and the recording will also be posted on this SCN page in a few days' time, and I'll also share this page's URL in the chat window later. Now, without further delay, I'd like to introduce to you Graham Sturmey, who will begin the main webinar presentation. So it's over to you, Graham, and thank you.
Thanks, Adrian. So this webinar is all about troubleshooting and various tools we can use to troubleshoot your BI4 system. So the first one we're going to have a look at is the SAP BI support tool, which is a tool that was written by support to troubleshoot issues within the BI4 platform. So we'll have a look at that probably for about the first 15 minutes. We'll have a look at that, and then we'll have a look at end-to-end tracing, when we should use end-to-end tracing and how we can use it to just focus on the information we want to get from our system for a particular problem you may have encountered. It's very useful for looking at particular workflows and getting just that information out. So we'll spend about 20 minutes looking at that, and then finally we'll have a look at viewing the logs that we've collected through our end-to-end tracing or standard tracing, and the best way to have a look at those within the system using something called the GLF viewer, which is the existing viewer, and a quick preview of something called the FlexiLogReader, which will be released in the next couple of months, which helps reviewing those logs once you've gathered them. So first of all, we'll start with the BI platform support tool. So if you haven't used it before, it's a utility which can connect to your system, your business objects cluster, and can produce a lot of information in a report, which makes it very easy to analyze that information, compare different servers, have a look at problems you've got in your system, and just provide that information that when you do have a problem, you can easily find out what could be causing it, whether there's any anomalies in your system that you need to go and investigate. So it's great for root cause analysis, for recording your system changing over time, and looking at performance of the system to see where maybe there's some bottlenecks as well. But who is it for? Well, it was written by support, as I say, for support engineers, and then released to customers so they can investigate problems themselves. I know a lot of people want to be able to resolve the problems themselves without having to raise a ticket for SAP, so this is a tool that can help you do that. But it's also for business objects administrators, and we'll see some of the functionality that not just for troubleshooting, but actually for helping administrators administer their system as well. So the easiest way to see how it works is by having a look at the tool itself. So this is a tool you can download from the SCN. So if we go to this web page here, there's a link on the presentation that you'll be able to see. But if you go to this web page here, this is where you can download the utility. So there's a lot of information about what the tool can do, updates in various versions, the different reports it can provide as well. So you can look at that after the webinar is completed if you wish. But this is the web page to go to. I'll paste that into the chat as well. Where you can download the tool from, or just search for SAP BI Platform Support Tool in a search engine. We'll find this as well. So the tool itself is a 64-bit Windows tool which you can run on. You can run on the server if it's a Windows server, but you can also run it on a client machine and connect remotely to your server. So the way to do that is we would just click Analyze, select All because we want to analyze the whole system, click on Next, then we type in the system name that we're wanting to analyze. So in this case, just type in the details, click on log on, and it'll go and connect to the system and prepare these reports for us. So depending on the size of your system, that can take a little bit longer than you'll see here. I'm looking at a relatively small system. It'll take about 20 to 30 seconds to complete. So it's extracting all the information directly from your system. So this is all live information at the time it runs. With metric information, it's nearly finished now, with metric information, information about your servers, and we'll go through those reports in a minute to show you the sorts of things we can troubleshoot with this particular tool. So from an administrator's point of view, we can immediately see that we have two nodes, so two server intelligence agents on this system, and we've got the names here. If I click on one of the buttons by clicking there or here, we can see a list of servers that belong to that particular server intelligence agent. And if I click on any one of these servers, this will expand and give me quite a lot of information, as you can see, about that particular server. So things like the version it is, what port number it's running on, various bits of information like that's server specific as well. So for instance, how long the longest query is against the CMS repository in this case, what the most number of users are on, things that are relevant to this server. If we look at a different server, such as the Web Intelligence Processing server, just by clicking on that down here, then we can see information that's relevant to Web Intelligence Report server, this particular Web Intelligence Report server. You can immediately see the state is up, so you can see it's running as well. So there's, as you can see, even without thinking about it from a troubleshooting point of view, there's still a lot of information there that an administrator can find useful. If we look at the summary, we can see things like, we can see that the version is okay, so this is useful to identify if, say you've got a system across 4 different servers, this will identify if 3 of the servers have been upgraded and 1 of the servers haven't. So in this case, this is a 2-node server across 2 machines, and both are on this version of BusinessObjects. So it shows you the version information in a readable form. So it shows it's SP4 of BusinessObjects. If we click on the alert summary, if there's any alerts within the system, so the metrics and information that are collected is analyzed against the standard information to determine whether it's a problem or not. So if there was a problem with the system, we would see the alert shown here. Adrian, could you mute all the lines again? Sounds like we've got a bit of background noise.
I will do.
Thanks.
All guests have been muted.
Thanks. Okay, so within the server summary, we can also see, as well as we saw for the individual nodes, we could see how many, we can see a list of all the individual servers for that node. We've also got a summary here of the number of different types of server we have. So we've got 2 server intelligence agents, but we've got 4 file repository servers, 2 input, 2 output file repository servers, 1 of each on each node. So that's useful as well to just check that you've got the number of servers you expect and that there's no problems with all the servers. So here we can see in a simple view that on this node all the servers are running, and on this node we've got 1 that's stopped. So it's a good overview if you're having problems, for instance, where users are logging calls to you to say we can't access Web Intelligence at the moment. You can use this to easily see if there are any problems with any of the servers. Okay, so finally at the bottom here, still in the summary here, we've not gone into any detail yet. We've got a summary of the hardware configuration on the machine, what version of the operating system it is, how much memory is available on the system. So it's very useful for support when you are logging an incident, if you can produce a copy of this report when you actually log the incident, because that gives support a good view of the system as it is at the moment to start their investigations. So sometimes if you log an incident, sometimes you'll be asked exactly what version of the system you're on. This has all that information within the landscape report. So that's great. That gives you an overview. It's great for administrators just to see the state of the system, to see if there are any obvious issues with the problem, with the system. But now we want to start looking at particular individual problems within the servers, for instance. So there's a couple of problems that often crop up when we're actually analyzing a system. Say, for instance, connection problems to the system from client tools. We can have firewall issues. So in this comparison view, we can see quite easily all the request ports, for instance. These are the ports that the servers are using. And if these are high numbers, like the numbers we can see here, 58436 and 56268, those tend to be automatically generated port numbers, which if you have a firewall, won't be open through the firewall. So you may previously, when you've got a firewall, one of the things you have to do is set up the request ports so they're open through the firewall. So you may have had to do that in the past when you've been setting up a system. So I'll quickly give you an example of where you do that. So if we log into the same system, just logging in now. Then we go into the servers page, and then go to the particular properties of an individual server. So for instance, we were looking at the central management servers here. If you have a firewall between yourself and the client tools, so things like the Web Intelligence Rich client or the Universe Design tool, then you would need to set this request port here. Now you need to go and do those for each individual server, and if you've got a lot of servers, you could easily have 20, 30, 40, 80 servers in your system, but the way you have to check those if you use the CMC, the Central Management Console, is by going into each server in turn and checking to see whether it's set. Whereas with this utility, this retrieves them all. You can see all of the settings for all of the servers in a line. So another problem you can have, as well as the request ports, so if I move to Web Intelligence, you can see here they're both in quite low numbers, so they're not in the 50,000 range, so we can see that these have the request ports set. So if you could easily have 8 Web Intelligence processing servers in your system. You can check that they're all set with the same settings quite easily. As you can see here, that the numbers that are different are actually highlighted in yellow, so you can quickly see that there's a problem there. So another problem we can have is there is a setting within the Web Intelligence report server which is the maximum binary size. And that can cause a problem. If that's too low and you're trying to export very large reports to a PDF or to CSV, if that maximum binary size is too low, then you can get an error. Now, it might be that you're only getting that error from some of your users, or they're only seeing the error occasionally, so maybe they're only seeing it one time in 4. So if you're seeing a problem only happen periodically for a user, so sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, that can often indicate that the problem is with one particular server. So if you've got 4 Web Intelligence servers, they may find that 3 times it works fine, and then the 4th time it doesn't. And that indicates that maybe there's only a problem with one of those Web Intelligence servers. So you can use this comparison report to see those settings. So if I scroll down at the bottom, the binary stream maximum size that I was talking about, on one server it's set to 50, which is the default value, but on the second it's set to 1. So if you do see anomalies about the way it's working, sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, it's good to compare your servers to see whether the settings are set the same for all of them. Because you would expect, in most circumstances, that all the Web Intelligence servers within your system will be set to the same values. So those will be determined by sizing, for instance. A sizing exercise by a consultant may say, these are the settings that you should have for your system. You have this many users, and you have this certain size of reports, and those are the settings that you should have on all your servers. So this is a good way of checking that your settings match what is. Other useful tricks for the servers as well. So for instance, we've got total CPU time. So this gives you an indication whether the web intelligence processing servers, for instance, are being used equally. So you would expect generally that as long as the settings are the same, the users should be distributed evenly across those, and then you would approximately get the same values. So I've used this system a little bit, and a very small amount. It's favoured web intelligence server processing server once. The more users you get, the more people using your system, then of course you would expect that to be approximately equal. It won't be exactly equal, but approximately equal. But the other settings that you can set, like the idle connection minutes, for instance, you would expect those to be the same according to the sizing done against your system. So it's a good useful tool to go and investigate those. And for each of the different types of server, we can do this comparison. So that's good. What if you're having problems with, for instance, scheduling? You know, we have scheduling problems. Maybe a user's put in the wrong password when they've defined the scheduling, when it's going to a managed destination, or your SMTP server's down, then your schedules will fail. But this tool also allows you to see which schedules are failing most often, because that can cause problems within your system. So on the left-hand side, we have a schedule inspection section as well, which can show you the errors that are occurring within your system, the top 10 errors which are occurring in your system for various types of schedule. It's broken down to the top 10 error messages, so it adds up the number of error messages of each different type, and we'll rank them here. Then it breaks them down to the top 10 web intelligence error messages. Again, this is scheduling, for scheduling, top 10 crystal reports, which objects are failing most often by rank, and again breaks it down. And finally, at the bottom, we have the largest instance sizes. So if you find one of your users is generating instances that are many gigabytes in size, this could be having an impact on other users in the system. So it's a way of identifying, troubleshooting those problems before they actually impact other users. So it's much better if you use something like this report to see that your SMTP server is not responding, as this example is here, before your users start complaining about it. Makes your life much, much easier. And similarly, if you can identify reports that are very, very big, which could be impacting other users, certainly slowing down other schedules, because large reports probably take a long time to generate, use up a lot of disk space. This is a great way of identifying those reports in advance, which you can then go and find out within the CMC, search for the report by name. You can find out who's scheduling it, if it's being scheduled regularly, whether it's something the business actually needs. It may be that it's retrieving a lot more data than is actually required, and then you would go back to the user and ask them to redesign the report. One of the new features within the SAP BI support tool is the ability to have a look at your platform search. This has been added in the latest version, that we can find out a bit more about the status, if you're having problems with platform search, the status of this the indexing and the retrieval of the data. So there's lots of useful information. I'm not going to go through it all now, but there's lots of useful information for each of these sections which explains what this is showing, how you can see the data, and what it means. So there's all these different cues that we can see down here that an index or a document has to go through until it comes out of the other end as an indexed object. So you can see, for instance, where it's getting stuck. If there's a large number waiting here, but doesn't get to Q2, then it shows you that the problem's here. Again, this is very useful for support to identify problems in your system if you're having a problem, for instance, with platform search, which is why it's a good idea to provide this report when you're logging incidents. So something new that's been added is very useful as well. Finally, from an administration point of view, the content inspection button over here will list the various types of objects you have in your system. Number of crystal reports, the number of users, number of events, all this information is summarized on this page, which can be useful to understand the size of a particular system as well. So all these things together can build up a picture of your system when you need to have a look at it from an administration point of view, or when you're raising an incident with support, so that we can then start investigating that issue and understand the size of the system, any problems within the system, any things that are being alerted like slow access to the CMS database. So that's a brief overview of the reports that exist here. Another problem you can have is a user rings up and says, I'm trying to do this action, it was working this morning, but it isn't working now. The support tool also gives you the option to compare landscape reports. So if I click on the compare button, here's a list of reports that I've generated previously. So if I select this one, I can compare, so they're all dated here, so I can compare a report from the 4th with a report from the one I've just made now. Click on compare, and it will go and look for differences between those two reports. So anything that's highlighted, there is a difference. So if somebody's changed a setting within your system, you can easily see what that setting is, so they'll be highlighted. So you can go through looking at all the differences and see if any of those match up to this particular user's problem. So for instance, if somebody had changed a setting within the Web Intelligence report servers, you'll be able to identify what's changed between then and now by comparing these two reports. So that's a great option as well. Okay, so that's an overview of the BI Platform Support Tool. And now we'll have a look at tracing. So how we get tracing from the system. So the version of the landscape report, the landscape report tool is currently on version 1.1.8. So that's a beta version that's available at the moment. If you go to the website and download it, you can use that version now. I think that was the question that was being asked. So you can download that now and use it against your BI 4.0, 4.1 systems. But you must run it on a Windows 64-bit machine. But it will work against Unix business objects clusters and Windows business objects clusters, but the client tool itself must be run on Windows 64-bit. Okay, so moving on to standard tracing. I'm sure in the past that you've used standard tracing to produce output from the system. So these are the standard steps you would do. So you would go into the central management server page, click on servers, and then we want to go and find out there's a problem with, for instance, logging on. So what you would do is users have reported problems logging on, and you want to identify what the problem is. You would go into the properties here, and then enable tracing. Click on save. And the great thing about standard tracing in this way is it turns it on. You don't need a restart of the central management server. So if the problem's happening, it will start logging straight away. So obviously then the user goes and repeats the workflow, and then we start getting logging. So the logging will appear in the standard logging directory for business objects. So I've connected here to one of the nodes on the system. So default location would be SAP BusinessObjects. SAP Business Objects Enterprise XI 4.0, and then logging. So in here are all the traces that are being generated for the servers at the moment. So by default, we get exception tracing. So all you see is when there's an error that gets logged as an error by the server, it will appear in here. And things like people logging on and typing in a wrong password may be considered an error, because, well, it is an error, they get an error, but it's not necessarily the information you want to see to understand why it's failed. That may appear earlier in the log. So turning on the standard tracing as we have would generate that tracing. So if I actually go to, this is the server I turned it on for, go to SAP Business Objects, Enterprise XI 4.0 logging. If we then order by date, then we can see the traces. If I order them, refresh, we should start getting tracing. Here we go. Here's the tracing being generated for the CMS, for instance. We'll grab those logs and have a look at those, normally in a log reader of some type, because if you look at them, for instance, in a normal editor, just be here in a moment, then they're actually quite hard to read. We'll come on to reading them. As you can see, if we look through this, there's a lot of information there. And one of the problems with standard tracing, of course, is you're capturing every single action that this particular server does. For instance, the central management server is responsible for many, many actions, such as logging on, auditing, handling schedules, so determining when something's ready to run. So it doesn't actually run it, but it determines when something's ready to run, as well as many other actions. And also you've got the actions of all the users that are using that particular service at the moment. So for web intelligence, you would have everybody, all the actions for anybody who is currently running a report against that particular web intelligence server. So let me just change that back to the default again to stop that tracing. So the problem with that is it can be quite difficult to find the information that you're trying to find because of all the other information that's included in that log. It can also, a production CMS being accessed by thousands of users can easily produce very, very large quantities of data as well. So it could easily create gigabytes within a few minutes. And obviously, if you're wanting to then analyze that information, that's very, very difficult to analyze that quantity of information. Even just to copy it maybe to your machine to analyze can be quite difficult with that sort of quantity. You also need to know if you're going and refreshing a report, for instance, and we'll see an example of that in a moment, that if you want to do that, then you need to know which business object servers are included. So you would need to know that the CMS is included, web intelligence is included, adaptive processing server is used, the file store, each of those, and you would need to turn tracing on for each of those servers to capture all the workflow, and then analyze each of those individually to go and find out where the problem was. Obviously that can be quite difficult. So if you want to also log the information from the web application server, that is possible. Again, if we go to applications now, and we want to log user activity, then we will look at BI Launchpad and go to trace log settings here. Then we can enable tracing for activities within the web server then. So all the workflow activity that happens in the web server for BI Launchpad. So we can turn it on there, but the disadvantage of that with this type of tracing is, unlike the normal servers, is it does require you to restart the web application server to pick up that change. So something that's been developed is something called end-to-end tracing. So end-to-end tracing allows you to just trace the workflow that is causing the problem. So if somebody logs into Business Objects and they get an error, you can just trace for that user the action that happens. So the tracing is turned on just for that action. If they go into, if they're refreshing a report and there's an error, then we can also trace that as well. And that allows us to just have the bits of information we want in the logs to be traced, not all the other white noise, as it were, of all the other activities that are going on. So here's an example of end-to-end tracing. And we'll do an example in a moment. So we start end-to-end tracing, and then we start performing the action we wish to trace. So this is the workflow that causes the error. So this automatically turns on without us having to go into any of those trace log server settings in the CMC. For this user, just for this action, it will enable the web application server trace. And then the web application server talks to the CMS. It will enable the CMS trace. Now, of course, that will respond with the information that the web application server requested, and then it will trace a bit more in the web application server, and so on. Web Intelligence, if you're refreshing a report, it will then go and contact Web Intelligence. Web Intelligence will contact the CMS, which will talk back to Web Intelligence so that it knows which file to read from the file repository server. So then it talks to a file repository server to retrieve that Web Intelligence document, which will then go and refresh the document, which will then pass the document back to the web application server, and then back to your browser, so back to your internet browser. And so each of these actions, because you've started it with this end-to-end tracing, each of these actions, every time it passes a request onto a different server, we pass something called a passport. So it's a record of the action and what trace level you want to set for that user. So it passes that tracing, that request for tracing, up and down the tree of requests without you having to set those individually. So in fact, you don't even need to know which servers are involved when you're setting this tracing. It will automatically enable them in turn. You don't need to restart the web application server. It will automatically be traced because it's been started with end-to-end. So it's very powerful for limiting the amount of logging we create, because we're only creating logging for this particular action, but also because we've got less information in the logs, then we can also see that it's much clearer to find the information you want to see. So I'll give you an example of end-to-end tracing. So let me just close these browsers, and we'll start up the end-to-end client. So I'll double click on it, and then it will bring up this window here. So we click on launch, and this will launch our Internet Explorer. So what you need to do is you need to stop all internet browsers that are currently running. Seems like I've got one still running somewhere. Let me just stop that. So this is the error you get if you already have an Internet Explorer running. So we need to make sure we stop that. And I'll do that on my other screen. Yeah, so there's one still running. Okay, so now click on launch. Still a problem. Okay. Here we go. So now I've launched our trace. So down here, this has changed. So now Internet Explorer is grayed out. We can give our business transaction. So our business transaction is the workflow we're going to run. We can give it a name. So I'm just going to use the default My Business Transaction. We can also set the level of tracing that it will perform. So this is the same as going into servers and then setting a level there. We have low, medium, and high, or none. So because we're just wanting this particular workflow, it's a good idea to always set it to high, because we know we're actually tracing the minimum amount of data. And then we just say Start Transaction. So now we can perform our workflow against the system. So if I try, for instance, refreshing a report, log on and go and refresh one of the reports, and it will, it will then, at the moment it's turned on Web Application Server Tracing, turned on CMS Server Tracing just for this action, and we can see that there's activity happening because in the recording section down here, we can see that it's sending and receiving bytes. That shows that this is working and we're receiving data. So if I open up one of these reports, just the action of opening it, of course, kicks Web Intelligence into life. And it's turning on tracing in the background as we speak, just for those servers. So if I go and have a look at logging, now one of the things about business objects, of course, it load balances very well. So even though I've logged on to a particular server when I was logging on to the BI Launchpad, we can't actually guarantee which servers are going to balance out or are going to perform the actions that are requested. So you may find that if you've got a multi-cluster node, then we use this CMS on node 1 to log in, but actually when we run the Web Intelligence report, it uses a Web Intelligence on node 3. And you can't tell that in advance. You can't force business objects to use a particular server without bringing the other servers down. So it could actually create the logging on any server. So that's another problem with standard tracing is you have to turn on tracing. If you've got 10 Web Intelligence report servers, then you have to turn on tracing on all those and then identify afterwards which server actually processed the request. So we've got all these servers now, and what you'd normally do is order the servers, the logs based on when they were last updated, and then just copy the most recent ones. But the BI support tool actually has functionality built into it to do all this for you, which is great. So if we go to Tool, go to Options and Landscape Configuration to begin with, we can set up our landscape to say these are all our servers. We can define where the logging path, where the logging directory is for each of these servers, set up a share, and then we can use this and it will automatically, when I've run an end-to-end trace, go and collect that information for us. So if I do execute end-to-end trace, actually now I've performed my actions, I need to click on stop here. This creates a file called Business Transaction XML, which has information about this transaction. So it has its name, its unique ID within the tracing as well. So then I can use this tool, click on end-to-end trace. Because I've set this up before, click on Working Directory and set up, create a directory to download that information. So I'll just call it New Logs, for instance. Make a new folder. Actually, there we go. New Logs. Click on OK. There you go. Click on Continue. Continue again. Now that business transaction.xml is actually created on the client machine where you're running the client plugin. So the one that I have generated will be in it's in the SAP client log and the latest one, which is this one. Open it up. Now we have the transaction ID. Now that's going to be useful later on when we're analyzing the logs. But for the moment we click on Run. And what that'll do is it looks at all logs that have been updated in the last 24 hours and copies them from the machines that you specified in your landscape to the local machine. Now there's one very important thing. We mentioned that not only do we have the business object servers logged, but we also have the web application server logged. So that's actually stored in a different location than the rest of the files. So it doesn't matter which web application server it is. It creates a directory with this format. So SBOP web app, then BI Launchpad or CMC, depending which the application is, the IP address, and _8080, that's the port number it's running on. Now, the location of these files depends on the user that is running the service that is running the web application server. So, for instance, if you're running this as administrator, then you would actually find it in users administrators is where you would find those files instead. The reason they appear in the root of C, which is the default, is because Tomcat, which I'm using, is running as the local system user, and this is the home directory of the local system user is the root of C. But you need those files as well, because those files are used, they're part of the workflow, and so you haven't got a full picture unless you've also got the web application server logs. Okay, so you can see this is now copying those up, it's compressing the files, and then it's downloaded for them for me onto my machine. So it makes it a bit easier. If you've set up that landscape and you have a share, a Windows share to that machine, or a Samba share if you're using Unix, then you can copy those to your machine with the minimum of fuss. It does it automatically for you. So we've created this entry new logs, and if we go in here we can see all those logs that have been generated during that period. So we'll come on to looking at those logs in a minute. Now, the standard logs, with the standard logging, even if you turn all these logs on, if somebody does a workflow, it's very hard to follow it from the web application server to the central management server, back to the web application server and so on, to follow the route at which the action takes. With the end-to-end plugin for Internet Explorer, then it actually includes in the logs a passport ID. So that was the ID that we saw here. So if I look at the passport decoder and look at the business transaction.xml, this is the one that was created by the client plugin. You can see this transaction ID, and then we can look in the logs, and wherever that transaction ID occurs, then we know that that particular line of the log relates to this user's workflow. So that's really, really powerful, because now we can link all our logs together into that workflow. Okay, so we've looked at that. We'll look at viewing those logs in a moment. But if I just go back, we can have a look at what are the advantages of end-to-end tracing. So we don't need to know which servers are used, because it automatically turns on each of the servers. We're limiting the amount of tracing we're collecting, which is only the tracing that is relevant to your workflow. We can also trace schedules. So even though you go and start a schedule, it's not just the action, the workflow of starting the schedule or creating the schedule that is traced. Every single time that schedule runs afterwards, then you will see the tracing turned on just for that schedule. So that's really useful as well. If it's a problem that only happens when you schedule a job, that can still be traced. It's not just the action of creating the schedule that can be traced, it's the schedules themselves as well. Now, there are some disadvantages. The most obvious one is that you do need to know what the workflow is that triggers the problem. So if you don't know that, then obviously you can't use the end-to-end plugin to generate the error. You need to know what it is. It needs to be something that can be done in your browser, so logging onto BI Launchpad through your browser. It doesn't work with things like Webby Rich Client. The information design tool has to be browser-based. One of the caveats is that if it works through an add-in, such as Flash or Java, then that's not also traced, because the plugin can only hook into the direct requests made by the browser, not by third-party plugins. What that means is things like monitoring can't be traced this way. So in the trace, what you would see if you tried that is everything up to opening the monitoring application, and then you wouldn't see anything that you were doing within the monitoring application. For things like report creation, the Java applet, although it's not it doesn't create the traces itself, you could instead use something like the HTML view and use that instead. So that's one of the other options when you're opening or viewing reports, modifying reports. You can set it to use just HTML, and if you can reproduce the same problem there, then that will be traced. Okay, so those are the disadvantages as well. So what we're really interested in is we've got these traces now. How do we view them? So there's a couple of tools we have for viewing those traces. So the first one, which is available at the moment, is something called a GLF viewer. So I'll show this quickly. You open up the GLF viewer. You say you want to open up the traces. So we created those here in this directory. So what you do is you just select all the traces in this directory and click on Open. It processes them and displays them in a column view. So you can easily hide and show different columns. We'll see it appear in a moment. So it's just reading those in now. And then you can filter on our business transaction ID. So that was that big long number that we saw here in the SAP decoder. Yep, there. So it's this transaction ID here. So I'll take a copy of that. I'm copying that to my clipboard. Still waiting to finish. That'll be done in a moment. Because we've got quite a lot of logs, it's loading them all into memory. So it is processing them. It just takes a moment. Nearly finished. Nearly finished. So while we're waiting for that, I'll give you a preview of a tool that we're working on at the moment that we hope to release in the next few months, called the FlexiLogReader. As you can see, this one's completed now. So if we want to then filter and just show information about our transaction, because at the moment this is showing all the information in the logs, some of which isn't relevant to our end-to-end workflow. We can click on Filter, and then we select this entry, DSR root context ID. Paste that business transaction ID here and click OK. And then all you see now are the traces related to that action, which we can show in a slightly nicer view by selecting indent text according to scope. So each of the function calls are now grouped together. If we click on a line, then we can see all the columns that appear. If you're looking at them in a notepad, very, very difficult to read. We can scroll through our logs. So that's the existing log reader we have. So you can use that now. You can download that from the SCM website now. But I'll give you a quick preview of something that we hope to have available to all customers soon, called the FlexiLogReader. So we can do the same thing here. We've opened the tool, then go into the directory where we've stored those logs. Actually, if I go to, if I use these, drag that in there, select that it's an end-to-end trace. We have a BusinessObjects transaction ID. Loads those logs, and it asks us for the, wrong place, there we go. It asks us for that business transaction.xml that we have. So that one. And then this will automatically filter. It's not found it there. Click on that and filter. Then it's filtered it based on just those entries. So this is in a more readable format. The calls to individual servers are highlighted better. This is the web application server. If I hover over one of these lines on the left-hand side, hopefully you can see some of the entries are in bold. So it shows you us that this is related to BI Launchpad. If I scroll down somewhere else, this is an action in the CMS because that's in bold, and so on. And we can track through all these entries to find out whether there's a problem. Now, in the example I gave you, there wasn't a problem, but what we have here is two different business transactions here. So there's one I made earlier when I was getting an error from the servers. If I scroll down to the end, we can see the errors here. And because we're only showing actions for this particular user transaction and not other things, we've filtered everything out, we can quickly scroll back to near the end and find out the real error, which wasn't given to the user. We've got an error here saying that it was unable to connect to a server. So we can identify that that's the problem. In this case, we go and check our Web Intelligence report servers, start them up again if they're down. So this is a tool which will make, hopefully released in the next couple of months, to make analysing those logs easier. If there's other information you want from the log, one of the other columns, then you can simply add the entry here. So if we want the device name, so you can see which server it's coming from, you can also display that, as well as searching, regular expressions, and so on. So that's a good example of how you can then take those logs and extract just the information you need out of them. Use the end-to-end trace to generate just the information you want and not have full tracing on, and then also display them in an easily readable format. So at the moment we've got the GLF viewer. Soon we'll have this FlexiLogReader to make your life easier when looking at the logs yourself. Okay, so that's all I was going to talk about for troubleshooting, the landscape report and so on. So as well, actually worth mentioning, as well as the BI type logs, the GLF logs, because the FlexiLogReader can take other plugins, and it actually works for other areas as well. So we have a plugin for analysing Java thread dumps, for instance, to find deadlocks and so on. We've got a couple in pilot at the moment for Sybase Mobile and Sybase ASE as well, which will also be provided as well as the BI ones. So that will expand over time. Now, next week we have a webinar on monitoring, which can also be very useful for troubleshooting. I've not touched on that here. Next week, if you want to sign up, there will be a webinar about monitoring, and obviously there's a lot of information in there as well that can help you troubleshoot your system, whether you're running out of memory and so on, automatically alert you when there are problems. I'm not going to go into any more detail because obviously you can sign up for next week's webinar and find out more about that then. So if you have any questions, now's the time to ask them. We've got about 5-10 minutes where we can answer questions. So go ahead, and if there's anything you want answered, then let us know.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Graham. And a couple of things. This is Adrian here. We do have a couple of outstanding questions, and just touching on what you said, next week's webinar is scheduled to be on monitoring. The link will be open in the next couple of days, and everyone here will also receive email invitations. So please stay tuned for that. We did have a question, Graham, from Thomas Jens, asking which client plugin version to use, I assume for tracing. And I'm not sure if that's been answered already, but the question was about the version of the plugin. Are you able to answer that, or need some further information?
Yeah, no, it's a good question, that. So there's a KBA here, 1861180. I'll just click on that now and go to the KBA. For this list, there's actually two different versions of the client plugin. There's one for Internet Explorers 8 through to 10, and then there's another one for version 11. So if we go to this KBA, which is part of the slides, then this actually gives you more information about which one to use. So there's two different versions, one for Internet Explorer 8, 9, and 10, and a different one if you're using Internet Explorer 11. So it also includes information about if your workflow is quite long, then you may want to edit the botrace.ini file in this location and change this number. By default it's 5, so that means that BusinessObjects will only keep 5 logs. So if you are generating lots and lots of trace, it will start overwriting the old ones. You may want to increase that to 20. It very much depends on how long your particular workflow is. But these are the two versions of the plugin we have that you can download from this particular SAP note.
Okay, thank you. And there was a question from Ram asking where he can download the client end-to-end plugin. I think Thomas has responded with the URL, but if you have any further information on the download point, I guess you could share that with us now, Graham. But
Yeah, again, for the end-to-end plugin, this is the place you can download it from. This knowledge base article is the point where you can download it. If you look at the end-to-end, I think the URL was given earlier, the end-to-end platform support tool, there is also a section within this about where to download it from as well. I believe. No, actually, no, it's not this one. It's this link here, which I'll provide as well. This provides more information on how to use the end-to-end trace, plus a link to the version that is valid for Internet Explorer 8, 9, and 10. And then go to the knowledge base article for the version that's related to IE 11.
Okay, thank you. And a question from Arun Chanda. Can we compare production and disaster recovery server settings using the Compare Landscape report, which is listed under the Tools menu?
That's a good question. I'd need to go and check that. I believe so. Now, the problem with that is, of course, there will be quite a few different things like server names and so on. So it will highlight a lot more different things are different. I would need to go and check exactly whether it's practical to do that or not, or whether it's only comparing two different times for the same server. It's a good question.
Okay. And a question from Gopal. The business transaction name is getting generated instead of an ID. Is there any idea why the ID is not getting generated?
I think I need a bit more information about what the problem is there. The ID should be, if you want to go and get the information manually, the business transaction, let me go and find it. If we edit this XML file, for instance, the ID can be found in this BusinessObjects business transaction XML file. That's in the very first line, the ID here. So it should have the ID. We've got the name and the ID here.
Okay. So, Gopal, if that doesn't answer your question, please can you expand on that? A question from Susan Harris. Must the traces only be done using Internet Explorer?
For the client plugin, the end-to-end plugin, yes. It only supports Internet Explorer at the moment. I'm not aware of any plans to support any other browsers.
Okay, thank you. And, okay, so Gopal said thanks in response. So we're coming up close to the top of the hour, so if there's any last questions, please ask them now. Otherwise, we will be concluding this webinar soon. So I'll give a few seconds if anyone needs to ask something, start typing. Well, it looks like we have a question coming in from Tammy, who says, thank you, this was very good. I appreciate it, Tammy. And okay, so very last seconds now. Doesn't look like we have any further questions coming in, but a lot of useful information here, and hopefully this was proved very fruitful to you. So with that, I'd like to thank everyone for their attendance, and thank you very much, Graham. So we have a question coming from Arun. Very last seconds, Arun. Okay, maybe just a thank you. So have to get that question in there, Arun. Okay, when will FlexiLog be released? I know you.
Okay, we're just going through the process at the moment of the legal side of it to make it available on the SAP Community Network. So at the moment, I'm not sure how long that process takes, but we're just starting that process now. It's the same process that the BI support tool's been through as well. So we're expecting probably around about a couple of months, but in the meantime, there's the GLF viewer, which can also filter and just show you the end-to-end tracing. So that's what you use in the meantime. We're endeavouring to get that to you as soon as possible because we think that that's a really good tool for displaying those logs.
Okay. Okay, so thank you again. Thanks everyone again for your attendance, and thanks again, Graham, for the great presentation. A recording of this webinar will be available in a few days' time on the SCN webinar calendar page that I showed in the chat window. So we'll be contacting you all again soon with email invitations for the next webinar. And thank you again, everyone, for your attendance. That's the end of this webinar, and stay tuned for the next one. Thanks, and thanks, Graham.
Thanks, Adrian.